After the candy had been handed out, and copious amounts of sugar had been consumed, 4 friends sit in a dark room, lit only by the flicker of a television, enjoying the latest "you've gotta see this" pants-shitting movie, The Descent. Everyone has heard from someone or another that this movie will have you clutching for pillows and occasionally screaming. And so far, the film has done its job. There's just one problem: the laughter. One asshole cannot stop laughing at the movie's scares and at everyone else for being scared of them. It's me. I'm the asshole. Because I am immune to scary movies. In fact, they make me laugh more than anything. Well, except for one. This is the story of the one movie that got me. I really hate to come off like this. Oh, you kids today, what with your safe spaces and participation trophies? Why, when I was a kid... But there is a kernel of truth to that. See, when I was a kid, there were no warnings. You could be watching a movie based on your favorite Saturday morning kids show and get hit with this.
And when they finally pulled the driver's body from the twisted, burning wreck, it looked like this.
You'd be watching a family-friendly movie about children growing up and making friends and get hit with this. Yes, that is a child, as innocent as they come, who never did or said anything to hurt anyone, dying, scared and alone in the woods. It was rated PG. Or, worst of all, you'd be watching network television with your family and get blindsided by this. When my wife and I first moved in together, one of the things that took some getting used to was that my wife needs to have something on in order to fall asleep. I'm usually out cold as soon as my head hits the pillow, so one night she's looking for something to watch and happens upon Unsolved Mysteries. She presses play, and as soon as the theme song starts, it yanks me from a deep sleep, confused and utterly terrified as to where I was and what was going on, 20 years after the fact. I'm not saying that the time I grew up in was any better or worse than any time after, but it was different. We didn't have content warnings. Whenever you watched something, you were flying blind. I grew up in fear of alien abduction thanks to Unsolved Mysteries. If I was outdoors at night and I was alone, I usually kept one eye on the sky. And I don't mean like it was a phase. This was well into my teenage years and at an embarrassing age, until one night it just sort of dawned on me that none of it was real, and after that, I stopped being scared of anything from movies or TV shows. But the effect that it had was that because I was so scared and for so long, that it weaned me off of the idea of being scared. Until years later when one movie changed all that. 2002's The Ring. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Western horror movies mostly fell into one of two categories: gore fests and not gore fests. I'm not an expert on the subject, but it seemed like for a while there, practical effects artists were refining their craft and one-upping each other to produce the most disgusting portrayals of body horror imaginable. And I guess it's a good thing they did, because with movie technology rapidly advancing, their heyday was about to end. But what's important is that Japanese horror movie audiences didn't share this proclivity for the grotesque. Japanese cinema and even storytelling are typified by subtlety and nuance, which meant their horror movies didn't rely on shocking audiences with gore, so much as unsettling them with a well-crafted tale of terror. Enter 1998's Ringu, a Japanese film about a cursed videotape that, once seen, viewers will be killed within 7 days by the ghost girl who made it. The film was an international smash success, even outgrossing The Matrix in some countries, which meant that an American adaptation went into production soon after, and in 2002, The Ring was unleashed on audiences. In terms of story, it follows its Japanese counterpart pretty closely. The main character, an investigative journalist and aunt of one of the victims, finds and watches the tape, and sets off to learn more about its origins and save both herself as well as her son after he watches it as well. One of the interesting deviations between the versions is that, while the main character enlists the help of her ex-husband, in the American version he is a photographer, someone useful in investigating a videotape. In the Japanese version, the ex-husband is a psychic, and thus useful in investigating a ghost, What makes this difference intriguing is to consider the themes of both versions. The original Japanese film explores the clash between Japan's history and modernity, with ghost stories being an integral part of Japanese culture dating back millennia, confronting modernity in the form of a videotape. But for American audiences, we only got the theme of technology through this same character. While we're talking about The Ex-Husband, it's a good time to talk about the movie's weaker aspects. Director Gore Verbinski stated in an interview that he wanted to avoid casting big stars, because he wanted the film to surprise audiences. He wanted it to be something they found, similar to how people found the cursed tape. But I think this may have been too effective, because this guy might be the most forgettable character in the history of cinema. If you ever want to see a definitive representation of charisma, watch this movie. Brian Cox is in it for like 2 scenes, and yet he is infinitely more memorable than this guy, despite them both having memorable on-screen deaths. And speaking of cardboard, we also have Naomi Watts. Imagine getting a fat paycheck to be outshined by not 1 but 2 children, which brings me to the other major difference between the 2 versions. As mentioned before, in the Japanese film, they treat psychics as being, normal? But without that, it creates a void in the American version that the film tries to fill with creepy children? How does the son know so much about the ghost? Well, The Sixth Sense was a cultural epoch, so now every film studio is chasing that dragon. So the ghost woman is now a ghost girl, and the weird kid just has some kind of connection that won't be explored, so don't think about it. But enough dumping on the movie I'm trying to praise. Just what makes The Ring so scary? Well, I've alluded to this already, and it's hard to explain, but a lot of what it did was effective because, to American audiences, we had never seen anything like it before. Ghostly females with obscured faces, sharp camera cuts that leap perspective boundaries, sudden and loud bursts of incomprehensible noise. There's only one time you can experience these things for the first time, and for many in 2002, this was it. It would soon be snatched up by other studios and copied throughout the early 2000s, but yeah, you just had to be there. You just had to see the tape. Now, you may think that this ghost girl must have gone to a San Francisco art school, but each of the seemingly random images takes on meaning over the course of the film. Because another thing The Ring did well was to take ordinary things like circles, ladders, or chairs, and make them integral to terror, so the audience then incorporates them with feelings of dread, and these feelings would stay with the viewer after they left the theater. So, I've just seen The Ring, and there is absolutely no way a ghost girl is going to kill me in 7 days. Right? I mean, if a studio released a movie that killed audiences, people would be talking about it, right? Okay, let me set the scene. It's 2002, and I live in a small beach town. Since it's early November, all the tourists are gone, and the town feels empty. My home is in a single-wide trailer in a mostly empty trailer park in the woods with a beach just down the road. From the beach, you can see rocky cliffs and a lighthouse overlooking the water. Oh, and for good measure, a few blocks over there is actually a stone well that I drive by every single day that looks almost exactly like the one in the movie. So, in effect, where I live is as close to resembling the movie as possible without actually being on set. The day after I see the movie, I drive into work at
Outback Steakhouse.
Next door, they're building a CVS. Oh, hey, funny story. When that CVS opened, it became the place to be to get these new things called energy drinks that were all the rage at the time. One night, we had to call an ambulance because a cook was on copious amounts of Red Bull and cocaine, and it was messing with his heart. But that's a story for another time. Actually, that's the entire story. So I get to work, and as I get out of my car, I see something I've never seen before, or at least never noticed. A giant ladder leaning against the building that would become a CVS. There were no crews around, no other tools, just a ladder leaning against a wall. Huh. So I work my shift and walk out into the dining room and... You know how at the end of the night when the restaurant is closing, you flip the chairs up onto the table so you can clean the floors? Never noticed it before, but yeah, there are dozens of upside-down chairs. Well, guess I'll just go home, alone, into my creepy place in the woods looking out over the water with a stone well down the street. This carried on for days. Days of seeing the terrifying importance of things that, in hindsight, were completely insignificant. But you have to remember, it was a different time. It was 2002, a time in which symbols meant more than anything. After 9/11, if you looked at the clock and it was 9/11, you remembered it for no reason whatsoever. And so that was my life. See a ladder or a circle or a chair or a table or a well and feel dread for the next 7 days. Now, this is the part of the story that if you told me, I straight up would not believe you. I am a fully grown adult who is waiting for it to be 8 days since I saw a movie to erase the possibility that a major motion picture has put a ghost curse on my head. I leave work and decide I don't want to have Taco Bell for the third night in a row, even though they have these chicken jalapeno tacos that are actually spicy, and I didn't know at the time that they would soon disappear forever. So I decide to get a Stouffer's from Walmart before it closes and take it back to the scariest, creepiest place I've ever lived. But I think part of me chooses Walmart because this was it. This was day 7, and I just don't want to be alone. I want to be around people and feel the safety of a crowd. Which is why you can imagine my horror when I walk through that Walmart, aisle after aisle, and find no one. Not a soul. Sure, it was closing, but when have you ever walked through a Walmart and felt alone? For a moment I thought that maybe she had already gotten me. That I was now a ghost and just didn't know it, and hell was an empty Walmart that you wander around in until the end of time. But because of the strange emptiness and loneliness, I hadn't even noticed that on my way to the grocery section, I had wandered into electronics. And when I did notice, I turned and found myself gazing upon a dozen or so turned off televisions. I can't explain it. To this day, I can't explain it. I can't explain why the televisions all suddenly turned on to static for a few seconds. And I can't imagine how completely insane I must have seemed to the cashier who rang up my grandma's chicken and rice and Diet Dr. Pepper. But in the most empty Walmart, words cannot accurately convey how, for only a brief moment, the paralyzing fear I felt as I said to myself, "It's real."